Georgia's the 2 seed, going to the Sugar Bowl. It'll await the winner of Notre Dame, Indiana, and it'll play that team there in New Orleans. Let's get ready to talk to another one of our great Dog Nation colleagues here for a moment, Kaylee Mansell. Kaylee was busy all throughout the day yesterday at our Dog Nation tailgate, doing her Dog Nation game day pregame show, and now she joins us to react to the news here. I guess, Kaylee, let's start with the immediate, and we'll work our way back to what happened yesterday. The playoff field is set. Alabama does not get in. SMU does after kind of an ACC championship game thriller last night. What do you make of that big topic, but the 12-team playoff as it is now known in its entirety?
Well, I said Thursday on Dog Nation at large, and it's not just because I root for Georgia and I didn't want to see Alabama in it, but all year long, the committee preached the consistency that wins and losses matter. So if they would have put Alabama in over SMU today, then you're completely going against everything that you said this entire year. So I thought SMU deserved the bid regardless of wins or losses, because you're not punishing the Big Ten and the SEC runner-ups, and SMU's had an incredible season in the ACC. I thought they deserved it all along, but Brandon. I mean, it's almost comical. There's a sense of poetic justice that Georgia had the toughest schedule in all of college football, had to go on the road for so many games, just like Kirby Smart called out Greg Sankey for. And now you look at where Georgia stands in the college football playoff, and it's like we talked about, there's a certain amount of teams that you feel can actually win the national championship. And it just so happens that all of those teams are on the opposite side of the bracket. Georgia, I would love to see Notre Dame beat Indiana and then play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Y'all know I cannot stand Notre Dame. I couldn't have dreamed up a better scenario for the Dogs. So you know what? The journey was difficult, but the destination was worth it.
I think that's a really good point, Kaylee. Not only does Georgia get its kind of much-needed rest here, and obviously it's going to need to make good use of that rest because they got a lot of injury stuff to hopefully try to clean up here. A very, very challenging season, punctuated by one of the most just grinding football games I've ever seen last night against Texas. And we'll put the bracket back up here, let people see this for themselves. Based on my assessment of this, Oregon's a team that I think could win the national championship. I think Ohio State's a really dangerous team. We saw last night that Texas is, certainly capable. Georgia's beaten them twice, but Texas is a capable football team. I would say that Tennessee's a tough team too. The toughest teams, I think, in the country, as Kaylee points out, other than Georgia, of course, are on the other side here. And I do think if you're Georgia, the draw. Listen. Georgia's going to be on guard against everybody. This is not the kind of team that can sort of take anybody lightly. But when you look at Georgia's half of the bracket, so to speak, Notre Dame, Indiana ready to play it. And then the other side of that same kind of side of the bracket, Penn State, SMU, Boise State. I mean, you got to play somebody when it comes to playoff. Kaylee, I think you're bringing up a really good point. When you look at the other 5 teams that are kind of on Georgia's half of all of this and the pathway they'll travel through, New Orleans and potentially Miami for Georgia, you couldn't have asked for much better than that. I think you're bringing up a really good point.
Yeah, and think about it, the physicality of the teams on the other side between Ohio State, Tennessee, Texas, Oregon, and we'll even throw Clemson in there. Like, those are games where you're going to have to grind every single snap. Players are going to get hurt along the way. They're going to get banged up. After Georgia went through this season with all the road games, all the mess, the difficulty of it all, I couldn't have picked a better place for Georgia to be sitting. We said, if you're one of those teams where you don't know if you can win it all and you're not sure who you want to play, well, it's because you're the team that everyone wants to play. And it just so happens that all of those teams line up on the same side of the bracket. And I was very curious to see what they were going to do about the 3 teams, the 3 conference champions that weren't Oregon and Georgia. How do you seed Boise State, Arizona State, and Clemson? And I thought they might throw Arizona State in at 3rd, but I guess if they're going by how they've ranked these teams all season long, it does now make sense that they throw Boise in there. But SMU or Penn State's going to beat Boise State, and that's just how it's going to be. You can mark my words now. I'm not afraid that I'm going to have to eat them, but Georgia's going to be a favorite against all of these teams. So it feels like I'm dreaming and I'm going to wake up and this isn't how the rankings are going to be, because I just had this feeling that they're going to put in an Ohio State or a Texas on the same side of the bracket as Georgia just to give them some sort of competition. But I'm looking there and I would take some of the bottom 7 SEC teams over most of these scrums. So.
Yeah, no, I listen. I mean, I have my issues with a lot of these teams too. In terms of, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a coincidence to me that not even kind of comparing strength of schedule what the SEC does, but SMU did not play one of the stronger schedules of ACC teams, and perhaps it's not coincidental. Then they were able to put a good record together and make the playoff. Indiana did not play Oregon and Penn State and teams like that. That the teams that avoided most of the best teams within their own league are teams that made the playoff. And I put Texas in that same category too. Now, I think the Texas is still a good team, but no doubt they benefited from not playing the other kind of, highly ranked, nice record SEC teams. They didn't play Bama. They didn't play Ole Miss. They didn't play, Tennessee. They didn't play a lot of these teams. And it's maybe just not a coincidence, along with SMU, Indiana, teams like that from those leagues are the one that made the college football playoff. I think you have to kind of notice that. Let me also ask you about last night. And listen, since I've been doing DawgNation daily, this is the third time I've been able to celebrate Georgia winning an SEC championship. Most recently, before last night, would have been in 2022. That was an undefeated team. We thought they were going to win a national championship. I think the SEC championship that night was just sort of a step along the way. And happy about it. Kind of cool to beat LSU. But, ultimately, I don't know there was a great celebration after Georgia won the SEC championship in 2022. I can tell you this, for me last night, there was one heck of a celebration. And I think for Georgia fans everywhere, this was just one of the most memorable Georgia wins, really, of my lifetime. One of the gutsiest performances I've ever seen from Georgia. And I don't know where it goes from here, because I do think that Georgia's got to really heal up here a bit. And, this is a Georgia team that's still in the midst of trying to figure some stuff out. I can't really guarantee anything about the rest of the season other than, as you said, I do like the matchups for Georgia. But no matter how it concludes, last night for me, Kaylee, was a Georgia win for the ages. Putting a number on the wall, as they like to say, with an SEC championship, the confetti falling down. In the toughest SEC there's ever been, the toughest team was the one standing at the end. Man, I was so proud of that. What was your reaction to the way in which DawgNation embraced this SEC championship last night?
I've been carrying around my piece of confetti in my pocket all day long, Brandon. You see it?
Yeah, I love it. I love
I
it.
mean, at least for me and my personal feelings towards it, like, I'm just going to be completely transparent about this. I grew up a Georgia fan my entire life, a diehard Georgia fan. There was never anybody else in question for me. I saw them win their second national championship. And last year, my first year working with DawgNation, having to learn how to hold in so much of that emotion and realize, like, I also cover this team in a professional aspect. I can't be as emotional as I have been in the past. And then I go through my first season with DawgNation where Georgia doesn't lose any games. And then they get to the SEC championship, one that I felt really good about, and they lose that game. And I remember just like the internal heartbreak that I had for this team that I love so much, but not really being able to put that emotion on full display, and having to learn in that moment that, okay, like, losses are going to come. It's going to happen. You have to learn how to deal with it in a professional standpoint. But that was one of the things that I thought about when I woke up yesterday, was like, okay, I think that they're going to win, but there's also a chance that they don't. And I have to learn to be okay with that. But I'll never forget that feeling of them losing last year and having to overcome all of those emotions. So yes, there was a very large internal victory of walking out of the press box yesterday and feeling a different emotion, and knowing that they're going to be able to compete for a national championship, and knowing that so many of these guys, Carson Beck, Tate Ratledge, plenty of others, came back for that same feeling that we were all hoping for. And I did think there was a sense of poetic justice that Gunnar came in. He played incredible. He's a great kid too, but that Carson Beck got to hand off that last snap. I mean,
Yeah.
it's classic cinema. Cinema.
It was truly, truly, truly a memorable night. Kaylee, great stuff. Appreciate your analysis and all that. We'll look forward to hearing you this week around DawgNation. And, of course, a whole lot of fun to be had here in the weeks to come. So thank you so much for that. And, Kaylee, enjoy, I guess, a couple of minutes worth of a weekend here.
How about them dogs?
That's right, baby. Horns down. Love it. Kaylee, great stuff. You love that from Kaylee Mansell, as good as it gets. A great friend and a great colleague, and some really, really fun stuff on that. So Georgia has won the SEC. They are the 2 seed and the second-ranked team in the college football playoff in the Sugar Bowl, awaiting the winner of Notre Dame and Indiana. And after that, it's either Penn State, SMU, or Boise State. And she said it right. You can't ask for much better than that. Like, Y'all, this is one of those things where I don't know how this is going to end. I didn't. I mean, I said this all last week, leading yesterday's game. If I'm super confident that Georgia's going to go out there and blow somebody out, we say it. Before the season opener against Clemson, we came on the show for a week and said Georgia's going to win the game by 30 points. We were exactly right about that. When it comes to a lot of our predictions for Georgia this year, we haven't just been correct, we've been precise. And I'm telling you right now, this is a team that's been through a lot. This is a team that's got a lot to figure out over the course of the next few weeks. Either game planning for how you want to get Gunner ready to kind of really lead the offense. I'm talking about truly, fully lead the offense. Or what you have with Carson Beck, or perhaps some combination of the two, whatever it is. Next few weeks are going to be crucial for Georgia. Oh, yeah, by the way, we got transfer portal open up tomorrow. All of that's going to start sprinkling in on this. So I cannot guarantee you how this is going to end. But that right there, let me point this way because that's what it looks better on the camera. That right there could not be working out better. This thing right here, you've earned that. By beating Texas twice, you earned that right there. And that's pretty good stuff. I think that's absolutely right. We're going to get Connor Riley here coming up in a moment. Let me also say thanks to another one of our great sponsors who's made this so fun for us here. Yesterday, we gave away at our DawgNation Invasion tailgate a gift package from our friends at Jittery Joe's. What an awesome thing that is. They've got these really cool commemorative cans right now they're enjoying for the holiday season here. So if you want to give a great Christmas gift to somebody, listen, the Venn diagram of Georgia fans who also love coffee, like great tasting coffee, that's pretty good. So for that dog fan in your life, you don't know what to get them, look at that. That was from yesterday. But we just got all kinds of videos. It's like a real show. It's cool. See those commemorative cans right there? We've also got one over my shoulder in the studio here, celebrating the national championship, celebrating some of the great moments for UGA. 2021, back-to-back in 2022, great collectibles. But on the inside is that delicious Jittery Joe's coffee. I'm talking about voted Athens Best Coffee Shop 14 years in a row. And by the way, they got new franchise opportunities now, too, so you can bring a Jittery Joe's right there to your town if you want to. But also for Christmas, you can get one of those really cool commemorative cans. What a great way to celebrate the holiday season. JitteryJoes.com for more on that. JitteryJoes.com for more on that. So there is a lot going on right now. Georgia wins the SEC. Georgia gets the 2 seed. Bracket looks pretty good. Also, college football is in shambles right now over the debate about SMU getting in over Alabama after SMU fought, pretty impressively last night against Clemson, although falling just a little bit short. Clemson not only kicked its way into the playoff, but 2 ACC teams in. Let's keep the conversation going right now. Let's welcome in Connor Riley, our colleague from DawgNation. And Connor, let me start with what we just saw. SMU getting in over Alabama. Did the committee get it right? Are you surprised by this? And I'll let you sort of also broaden that out and look at the field altogether. What did you make away from Georgia of the announcement we just saw?
BA, I'm getting so many people mixed up here. We were sitting on one of these shows, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and you and Kaylee were just adamant that Alabama was going to find its way to get into this little playoff. And there was just one person on that panel that had the courage, that saw the vision to Alabama not getting into the college football playoff, and that was me. And, of course, the committee ended up getting it right. I don't believe that you can punish teams for losing in the SEC championship game or conference championship games. Important to note, ESPN announces right now that Georgia will play in the Sugar Bowl. That is confirmed. That game is set for an 8:45 p.m. Eastern time start. ABC will broadcast that game. Notre Dame, Indiana, they are going to play on the 20th, a Friday night at 8 p.m. in Notre Dame. So that Notre Dame team will get one potentially greater day of rest than the rest of those teams playing on that first round day there. But as far as Alabama and LSU, I believe that the committee actually ended up getting this right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Look, in a year in which everybody but Oregon has losses, I don't really care about your losses. I care more about your wins. And obviously, Alabama has much better wins than SMU does. And as I've said a couple times here, one of the things that concerns me about this playoff field a bit is, and putting aside my belief that the SEC schedules, the SEC teams are just tougher than what the rest of the country is. Putting that aside, taking the SEC kind of bias hat off for a minute, looking at some of these schedules within their own league, Texas makes the playoff playing a far easier schedule than much of the rest of the SEC. Indiana makes the playoff playing a far easier schedule than much of the rest of the Big Ten. SMU makes the playoff by playing a schedule far easier than much of the rest of the ACC. a lot of the best teams in those leagues, those playoff teams, did not play. And we can't say for sure that's the reason why they made the playoff, but it is a pretty dadgum big coincidence. And I do not think that's good for college football here. Obviously I've got my issues with the SEC only getting 3 teams in, but beyond that, the fact that you seem to be now incentivized to sort of decide which teams in your league do you want to kind of give the gift schedule to, because those are the teams that are able to now punch their ticket to the college football playoff. I think that's dangerous for the sport. People can talk about dangerous precedent by SMU being left out, but the kinds of things that got rewarded this year in terms of who made the playoff, I think that's a potentially dangerous precedent in its own right.
So it's the thing now that needs to be fixed moving forward, because I believe if they had put Alabama in over SMU, there were going to be serious repercussions for what this sport views with championship games moving forward. And so now they so clearly need to fix the scheduling issue that has been created. Something Kirby Smart, I think, sort of indirectly called out last night with Greg Sankey standing feet away in terms of, just the schedule that they had to play. Going on the road and playing Alabama, going on the road and playing Texas, going on the road and playing Ole Miss. The only ranked team that Texas played all season was Georgia, and they got them at home, and then they got them in a neutral site game in Austin. It's not an easy fix. I don't know exactly how you go about doing it. Maybe you make pods. Trying to balance these schedules, specifically when you have these bloated leagues that has been created by people like Greg Sankey because of the greed that they have chased with these live rights deals and just trying to have the best television product to offer, has morphed college football into something that continues to become more unrecognizable by the day. And so moving forward, I'm fascinated to see how they go about fixing these scheduling issues, because I think across the sport, not just Georgia and certain teams in the SEC, but I think teams in the ACC have this worry now. I think teams in the Big 12 have this worry now as well going forward. There's got to be some way to try and find a balance in schedule, because in some years it might help out and work out in your favor, like I think it did for an SMU, for a Clemson this year. But other years, like Alabama this year with the schedule that they had to play, I think the games that they had to play in ended up hurting them. And so how these commissioners now go about balancing these schedules is the top priority this offseason in trying to improve a sport that admittedly these conferences commissioners and these conferences themselves have helped break.
So do you agree with me that we're doing this all again in 2025, but there ain't no way we're doing this in 2026? Like whatever it is, it's not going to be this.
It's going to look very, very different. I would be surprised if we see, conference championships. Conference champions get automatic buys just based on the way that things are right now. It'll be hard for me to sort of see them going to that. I think they're going to expand because, again, this sport is all about greed and bloating out the product. And so you might see 14 teams where I think the Big Ten and the SEC champions, those teams end up getting your buys. Or you could even see them go to 16 teams and sort of do away with buys altogether if you're trying to chase and get the most inventory there. So I think it'll be interesting to see what the change is, but they very intelligently, and I will give them some credit in this, left open the possibility that they can change this again in 2026. I think given now that we have seen the first 12-team run, we're absolutely going to see changes when it comes to that.
So I'm guessing that, because I've always been on the air the entire time, I'm not really seeing social media or the TV stuff. I'm guessing that the SMU pick ends up being sort of the path of least resistance, right? That the Alabama pick would have generated far more controversy. The SMU pick will just, by and large, be viewed as less controversial, right?
Yeah, that is, it's the easiest to explain. I think you have the concern about what conference championship games mean moving forward. And quite frankly, they don't want to get into that right now. And so with Alabama, while every Georgia fan out there will tell you that Alabama is absolutely a better team than SMU, I think just based on the way that the season played out. And look, let's be honest. SMU didn't lose by 3 touchdowns on the road against a middling Oklahoma team. Like, that's something Alabama went out there and did. And so you can point to conspiracy. You can point to, hey, we have more natural talent. But the games that were played, even if the schedules were somewhat unbuilt and not built correctly in that matter, that ended up mattering there. And that's the biggest reason that Alabama is out, because I can guarantee you if they'd found a way to win that game, there's a chance they're the 5 seed over Texas right now. So I think that Alabama, you can complain about the committee and the way that they chose to rank SMU. You really have no one to blame but yourselves for laying an egg in Oklahoma that late in the season.
So let me do a couple of things here. I thought that Kaylee Mansell brought up a great point a moment ago. Look, we've complained about, and listen, I'm always the first one to notice any kind of perceived slight against Georgia, but this bracket could not set up better for UGA. Now, I don't know if they're healthy enough. I don't know if they're good enough. I don't know if Georgia is fully capable of taking advantage of this, because obviously this is a team that's left us with some questions at time. But on the heels of an all-time win last night, one of the most courageous, gutsiest performances ever, Georgia got a prize befitting that performance, because awaiting the winner of Notre Dame, Indiana, and then looking over at either Boise State, SMU, or Penn State after that, you couldn't ask for anything better than this. And I do not know if Georgia will be able to take advantage of it. I just don't fully know. But my goodness, that is exactly the kind of prize you ought to get for winning the kind of game that Georgia just won last night. What do you make this path, what we're calling the road to Atlanta here, what do you make of this path for Georgia right now, Connor? Is it as juicy for you as it is for me?
It's impossible to know right now, just given what Georgia is having to deal with Carson back and what the severity of that injury ultimately is. Look, Gunnar Stockton deserves a ton of credit for the way that he played. Nothing should be taken away from him. That was a warrior effort by him coming off the bench. And I think Georgia is going to have time to scheme things up. But let's also be honest here. He was 12 of 16 for 71 passing yards. That's not sustainable, even against a team like a Notre Dame that I think has a good defense, like a Penn State defense that has capable teams. We have to wait and see before crowning Georgia here, or thinking that they're going to get to Atlanta to see the severity of this Carson Beck injury. But I think with the uncertainty around it right now, you need this defense to play like they did yesterday, to make those plays, to have 6 sacks, 15 tackles for loss, multiple interceptions. That's sort of the path that I see moving forward. But I'm not saying enthusiastically, hey, we're going to sit here and be proud and happy about the path that we got, because of the uncertainty that looms around the Carson Beck situation right now. Last night absolutely deserves to be celebrated. I believe it should be. And as we get closer to the playoff, maybe we can shift our attention to that. But if you're asking me that here right now, it's hard to sit here with a rosy outlook on what this path might be like, given the uncertainty that Georgia faces at the quarterback position.
But I do think you can break them apart, right, and separate them. I totally agree with you. I think there are massive questions about Georgia. I really do. And listen, I mean, I think there have been questions about Georgia for most of the season, and now they're even more complicated because of the injury situation at quarterback and all that kind of goes along with that. So I don't know that Georgia can exploit this to its full value, but you couldn't ask for better than this. And listen, if it ends up falling short and it's not a championship season, you can't blame the bracket for it, because as the biggest sort of Georgia, guy in the world, if I could have scripted my bracket of the teams likely to be in the playoff, these are the ones that I would have wanted. If I could have picked my opponent, these are the ones I'd be picking. So if it falls short for Georgia, they cannot blame the committee on this, because they got the games I would have wanted them to have.
And conversely, if you're Oregon, how are you feeling right now? Unbeaten team, unquestionably the best team in college football in the regular season. You get the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State in the quarterfinals in the Rose Bowl. And then potentially you're playing a Texas team who is, per the committee, the best non-conference champion out there. So when you look at the way that this is set up, I think Penn State has a pretty nice path to the semifinal with games potentially against SMU and Boise State. But I think if you're a Georgia fan, if you're looking at this and you're able to distance yourself from the uncertainty with the quarterback situation right now and what this team might look like offensively, I think you have to like with what you have out there.
So let me do 3 things, and I'll let you go after this. Let me just talk about the game itself for a moment. Connor, it was for me an all-timer, and I have been very, very lucky to be in a lot of buildings for a lot of Georgia celebrations. That one last night just felt really special for me, and I love the way this team celebrated. I like the fact that the SEC championship still means something to these guys. I think what Kirby said on Thursday ended up being a big foreshadowing for how Georgia kind of approached this. I thought Tate Ratledge said some beautiful things about that. A lot of the guys said. I think Texas is a good team. I've got a lot of issues with how they've been kind of treated since they've joined the SEC, but you can't say they don't have a bunch of pretty athletes and a good football team. But Georgia's just more battle-tested, and Georgia was very comfortable in that fight last night. And it wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but Gunnar Stockton was courageous. The team seemed to kind of rally around him. Defense was amazing, kind of replicating really what they did the first matchup, which I did not think was going to be possible. If the season ended last night for Georgia, what an unbelievable moment that was. Thankfully, it doesn't. They've got more chance to create moments to come. But if that's the big moment of 2024, that's one I'm going to remember forever.
Yeah, I was walking out with a fellow beat writer last night, and I asked, let's remove the natties there, because I think that those are obviously so different. Where does that win rank among the all-time wins for Kirby Smart. It's probably just behind that win over Ohio State in that same building. I think it's unquestionably the best of the SEC championship wins that Georgia has. In my opinion, I'd put it over any regular season win that Georgia has. The person I was walking with hates Tennessee, maybe perhaps more than Kaylee hates Notre Dame. and so he had that 2022 Tennessee win up there. But it's such a culture win and something that, as a media member and aware of it, and look, I wrote a very personal story about why the SEC championship game matters so much to me on Friday. When I see national media members out there saying, oh, conference championship games shouldn't be played, they don't matter. After having been in attendance and watching that game and seeing what it meant to Georgia players to win that game, to play in that game, conversely, Texas to play in that game and try and win that game. For media members to come out and then say that we shouldn't play these games, they shouldn't go out there and play and compete in them, I'm sorry. This is not a job that you should be doing. These games deserve to be celebrated. These players deserve to be honored for that. And if you can't take your own opinion and thoughts about this sport and take that out of consideration for just a second and honor those that went out there and played in the game, the famous Teddy Roosevelt speech, the man in the arena, it's not about the critic's opinion that matters. If I'm a player out there seeing someone trying to delegitimize last night's win, I'm incredibly frustrated. I know you're usually the one to go after journalists and go after people in the media, but when I see things like that and people calling into question the value of these conference championships games, when for Georgia, it meant so much for them to go out there and win that game. I'm sorry. I just don't think we're watching the same sport and following the same teams.
Yeah, Connor, I think that's beautifully said. I agree with that wholeheartedly, 100%. Look, down here, we are just a very particular kind of person, right? I mean, if you had to do away with something, we may do away with the playoff and keep the SEC championship, right? I mean, that's the thing that, if we're doing away with something, I'm not really quite so sure of the future of the college football playoff, but the SEC championship, I think, has a chance to, at least in the hearts and minds of people down here, has a chance to live on for a very long time. And I think you're exactly right about that. I think there are a lot of people who don't understand it because they kind of only see it through the lens of playoff positioning. And there was so little of last night that was actually about the bye and who's going to get the 2 seed and who has to play in the first round. This was about Georgia, the personal pride of getting a chance to kind of win an SEC championship for a coach who knows what that means. I think that you say that so well right there. All right, let me kind of shift the gears to something that's a little less enjoyable, but it's also a conversation that has to be had. I guess we'll hear from Kirby today, and then after that, we probably won't hear from him for weeks. So we're not going to get a lot of official reporting on Carson Beck. To my eyes, it did not look good. If you had to speculate, this is obviously unfair. Are we thinking that Beck could perhaps play in the Sugar Bowl? I know you don't know; it's an unfair question, but I mean, to my eyes, I certainly would be pretty surprised if he did.
We're going to get a chance here to talk to Kirby Smart at 2:30. Again, you don't want to speculate on these things. It's at least, if you're looking for a positive here, if you're looking to spin it, he was at least able to come back in the game and hand the ball off. Watching a lot of football and seeing the way that he took his hit and the way that he took that hit and with where, and again, this is super micro analyzing it. You look at where that ice bag was on his arm. You wonder if it's an elbow injury. You wonder if, it's a UCL injury. That's a Tommy John injury. Now, that would obviously take him out of, I believe, the rest of the season if it is a Tommy John UCL injury. Brock Purdy did have that same injury in the NFC Championship game a few years ago. He was able to come back and start the first game next year. But if that is the injury here, then Carson Beck's time at Georgia has in all likelihood come to an end. But, again, we still don't know. The MRI was done today, and again, I'm not a medical expert here. I don't know if Kirby's going to have the results by the time we get a chance to talk to him around 2:30 today.
Something tells me probably not. Something tells me probably.
Yeah, again.
Something tells me. Go ahead.
Even if we did, he might not tell us. So, but again, great shot by Cody Chaffins there to sort of see where that is.
Yeah.
Described as an upper extremity injury. That looks pretty clearly to me being on the elbow there. And you hate it for Carson. But I will note, if that was his last step in the SEC championship game last night, for him to come in and be a part of that moment, look, he's gotten a ton of criticism this year. For him to come in and do that, and I actually, again, the numbers don't reflect it. I thought he played pretty well in the first half there, all things considered. what a moment for him, and what a way for him to get a win in that championship game, a game that he came back specifically to play in.
And I'll also say this. I mean, I don't know the first thing about anything medical related. So, I mean, maybe the healing process and this is far easier than I'm giving it credit for. And maybe behind the scenes, George already knows that. Anything's possible, of course, when it comes to that. My guess is, though, we are in New Orleans on the day of the game without really much in the way of confirmation. Now, traditional bowl games, you have practice viewings and things like that. I don't know how all of that's going to work in the kind of the new world that we live in. But my guess is that Georgia is, and maybe it's their prerogative to do this, they're going to try to be as secretive with all of this as they are allowed to be, with availability reports and open practices and stuff like that. But they're going to try to keep this as under wraps as they possibly can, just to keep whoever their eventual opponent is, sort of thinking about the different possibilities at quarterback. My guess is we don't get a lot of official information on Georgia on this until like the actual game is played. Is that kind of the sense you probably get on that too?
I think I have a better chance of acquiring the nuclear launch codes than I do the official status of Carson Beck before this game in the Sugar Bowl on January 1st.
All right, let's do one more thing. And I hate to do this, but I mean, people do got to be ready for this now. We saw Michael Jackson last night going to the transfer portal. Very, very odd timing. Obviously, Julian Humphrey, not much better, but, you wish those guys well in the future. When are the floodgates going to open? Is it like first thing tomorrow morning? Do we see that start trickling in tonight? And Georgia's no different than anybody else. Everybody's going to have a lot of players going to the transfer portal. It's just the thing. It is not the sky falling. This is not the apocalypse. It is just a mathematical fact that you're going to have a long list of names start to show up for Georgia. Some of them expected, maybe one or two, perhaps not necessarily expected. But the point is, when is that onslaught of news going to start coming out?
Would not surprise me if it's as early as tonight, but tomorrow morning as well, when the transfer portal officially opens. There are going to be guys that are going to go in there. You've already seen Julian Humphrey do so. He played every snap in that first game against Texas, and he decided that he was done and ready to bounce and look somewhere else there. Michael Jackson, I'm not even sure if Georgia had made it back to Athens yet by the time he announced that he was going into the transfer portal last night. I still wrote that story from the press box in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So it's going to happen. This is just the world that we live in now. Guys are going to go ahead and make decisions for themselves. Kirby Smart talked about this briefly last week and sort of dealing with that and knowing like, hey, I want the guys here that want to be here. If you're thinking of looking elsewhere and want to go somewhere else and explore your options, this team is not for you at the moment. And to be honest, this is just the world we live in. And there are going to be guys that look for their own opportunity out there instead of finishing things out with this Georgia team.
So I don't like to speculate on any kind of transfer portal names. That's just sort of a rule of mine. I don't like to do that. So I'm going to speak in broad general terms. This is the last thing I'm going to ask you. I think you sort of have an idea of the kind of player that's likely to go into the portal, and there probably be several of those. But you're also on guard for the sort of different type of player who is starting, who seems to have a bright future, who is kind of a part of the story at Georgia, that kind of, oh gosh, that guy with a chance at a national championship still in front of Georgia, and obviously the thought of also building a 2025 roster. What do you think the chances are that we get oh gosh, that guy's going to the portal? What do you think the chances are we get one of those here over the course of the next, however long this thing's open, about a month or so?
Before the end of the season, I would say pretty low, but it wouldn't surprise me if the season comes to an end and players are going to have 5 days to enter the transfer portal after that ends, because the transfer portal will, I believe, close before Georgia's, next game is played. They have 30 days from the 9th, so I believe until January 8th.
Okay.
So there's a very real chance that Georgia's season is still being played when the transfer portal officially closes. So I think, in terms of the big name guys, like you think back to a year ago, would Jamon Dumas-Johnson have gone in the transfer portal if Georgia were playing in the college football playoff? Absolutely not. And so I think for those guys, it might be a surprise, but guys further down the roster, second and third year guys who haven't played a whole lot and don't have a clear path to playing time, I think is something that those are the types of guys to look out for. And look, like Michael Jackson had one catch this season for a wide receiver room that really needed some juice there. And it's not exactly surprising. He actually ended up taking a red shirt this year because he only played in 4 regular season games. So some of these names, if you're really willing to dig into it and look into it, aren't going to be all that surprising for you.
I said my last question. Now this is my last question. Obviously, the portal deadline is for entering the portal. You don't have to choose your school. But to flip the script on this, Will we also start hearing about the players that Georgia's bringing in from the portal too? Because I guess you got to be in class in January if you want to do spring practice, I reckon. So we're going to also start hearing about portal players that Georgia's bringing in.
Yes, I think you're going to hear that. I think they're going to want to be quick in getting some of their guys that they want, guys they want to target. If we're talking positions, I think wide receiver is going to be a spot that you look at once again to continue to add guys in there. You've already seen one wide receiver leave. I think you're going to see some more attrition there at that position. I think safety is another one. Malachi Stark's probably going to be a first-round pick after this season. Dan Jackson will have exhausted his eligibility, and they might be looking for some additional help there at that safety position. And then if there's a capable defensive lineman or maybe potentially a quarterback out there that Georgia would be interested in that would want to come here and fit the culture fit, I think that's something that they're going to look at as well. But they're absolutely going to be aggressive in that regard in terms of finding guys and getting guys in. I believe the window to visit schools if you are a transfer player is December 9th through December 22nd. So those are sort of the dates and why you would expect to see teams be aggressive, even though Georgia will obviously have their college football playoff game after that window closes.
Kind of great stuff. Obviously written so much at DawgNation.com. There's still more to be written about that. So I just appreciate all your coverage there. I love reading it, love following along with you. It is going to be, I mean, obviously the portal stuff is challenging, but larger than that, it's going to be a really fun month. Getting ready for kind of an old school Sugar Bowl, like the old days, perhaps even facing an old school Sugar Bowl opponent in Notre Dame. That's kind of a cool symmetry a bit, too, for a lot of Georgia fans. So I'm excited about it. I'm thrilled about the win last night. I loved your coverage of it. We'll look forward to talking to you this week on DawgNation, including DawgNation Daily as well.
We sleep in February, BA.
I love it. That's great stuff from Connor Riley. Awesome. All right, before we wrap up here in a few minutes, I'm going to give you a big announcement that I'm really excited about that'll kind of relates to all of this, so we'll do that here coming up in a moment. Let me also give a shout-out to our friends at the UGA bookstore. This sweatshirt, this little pullover thing, the vest is just a random thing. But this sweatshirt right here, Big Power G, good-looking red. This came from the UGA bookstore. So much of the stuff that I wear on a regular basis came from the UGA bookstore. So you want to get decked out and dressed up and ready to go for a big run through the Christmas season, the college football playoff. You want to buy some great UGA gear for the folks in your life that you know and love. The UGA bookstore is my top choice for good-looking UGA apparel. The Nike coaches gear, all the commemorative jerseys. By the way, the SEC championship stuff, that's all there. SEC champions, Sugar Bowl, you're going to get all that kind of up to the moment. Timely gear. You can get all of that with our friends at the UGA bookstore. So you can shop online, UGAbookstore.com. Also, go see them in Athens. It's a kind of a cool spot to be at, right next to the Tate Student Center, right across from Sanford Stadium. You can go by and see the UGA bookstore. The West End Zone's always open, so you can kind of step out there and get a nice picture at Sanford Stadium. Make a day of shopping there in Athens. It's kind of always a fun thing to do. You can also go Instagram, Facebook, things like that too, and kind of connect with the UGA bookstore. Be a part of the great, great stuff they have going on this holiday and Christmas season. Online, UGAbookstore.com or in store. You want to look like a good-looking dog here for the month of December into January. That is the way to do that.